Welcome to The Alcove. I'm Mark Malero. My guest today is the activist and filmmaker Byron Hurt. He's here to discuss his documentary, Hip Hop, Beyond Beats and Rhymes. The film has played and received high praise at festivals in the United States and around the world, and was recently broadcast nationwide on PBS's Independent Lens series. Here's a look at the film.
One thing I really want to say, and I want to make this very clear to all my viewers out there, I love hip-hop. I grew up with Big Daddy Kane, you know, the Jungle Brothers, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Kwame, whoever you want to talk about in hip-hop. I listen to their music, I party to their music, I listen to hip-hop to this day. I sometimes feel bad for criticizing hip-hop, but I guess what I'm trying to do is to get us men to just take a hard look at ourselves. We're like in this box. In order to be in that box, you have to be strong, you have to be tough, you have to have a lot of girls, you gotta have money, you gotta be a player or a pimp, you know, you gotta be in control, you have to dominate other men, other people. You know, if you're not any of those things, then, you know, people call you soft or weak or a pussy or a chump or a faggot. And nobody wants to be any of those things. So everybody stays inside the box.
Welcome, Byron.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's interesting, you say that hip-hop is trapped in a box. I'm wondering if you can tell me what you mean by that and what made you want to make this film.
Well, what really inspired me to make the film was my own sort of growth and evolution, you know, my own process of learning and questioning things like masculinity, gender issues, sexual violence, misogyny, and that sort of thing.
Right.
And all of that kind of came out of the work that I had been doing with a program called the Mentors and Violence Prevention Program, which is a program really to educate men, to educate boys and men about sexism and men's violence against women, and to examine masculine identity, which is something very rare for guys to sort of undertake that kind of a process.
It is,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a really unique program, and it was like a transformative process for me. You know, I mean, it was like a real transformative period in my life, you know, where I really started to examine all things related to masculinity and maleness and what it means to be a man. And all of that kind of helped me to challenge the music that I was listening to so heavily at that time. And that was hip hop, you know, music that I grew up with, the music that I partied to, danced to, hung out with, you know, it was just my music, you know. Yeah. And it still is my music for the most part. Mm-hmm. But so that really inspired me. That program inspired me to make this film. And what I learned in working with that program is that a good number of men are trapped inside of a box, right? Okay. And a lot of us really conform to this notion of manhood or masculinity that may not really be who we are as guys, as men. And so we fall into that box, and it's the same. And that's that same sort of box that I saw hip hop being in. This whole idea, this concept that you have to be hard all of the time. Right. You have to project, you know, this certain aura of toughness and invulnerability, that you couldn't show weakness or fear or trepidation or anxiety or anything like that, right? And that you always had to be the man. You know, you always had to be, you know, on stage and performing for other men and performing for other women. Yeah. And so I saw that in the work that I was doing. I saw it in my own life, you know, coming out of a culture where I played football for a very long time in my life, from the time I was 7 years old. Right. And then being a member of a fraternity, I knew that these were real things, and I saw it translated into hip-hop culture. And so I just wanted to examine all of this stuff.
And one of the things I'm wondering is, it seems to me to be almost a question of consciousness. Yeah. What do you think it is that's pervasive in hip-hop, in American life, that prevents the kind of consciousness that would stop a lot of this misogyny, homophobia, these kinds of things?
I think class, education, I think exposure to models of manhood and masculinity that are not typical, right, or not what you expect to see. Right. And so I think that's what leads to I would say the high levels of performance of masculinity, the hyperaggression, you know, the violence, the misogyny, the sexual violence. I think that has a lot to do with, you know, people growing up in a culture where it's socially acceptable. That kind of behavior is socially acceptable. It's prevalent. People see it all of the time, and so it becomes like a model, it becomes a way of life. It becomes normal.
Right.
And you have to have somebody who intervenes in your life and says, nah, that's not cool. You know?
Now, was there somebody that intervened in your life that kind of pointed the way to you, or was it something that you found on your own?
Well, I think I've always had really good models of masculinity around me, you know, just growing up. Mm-hmm. Of course, there was the real traditional patriarchal kind of masculinity that I grew up in, you know, coming out of a home, you know, that was run by a father who grew up in the South, right, in Jim Crow South, you know, okay, which is a very patriarchal sort of environment. But anyway, yeah, the bottom line is that, yeah, I had some really good models, right, in my life. But it wasn't really until after I graduated from college and I met this guy named Jackson Katz, who really got me to examine masculinity like in a really critical way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's interesting, what do you think in terms of hip-hop? Like, you make it very clear in the film that essentially hip-hop is marketed by, you know, mostly white corporations. And once you get past, I think it's 600,000 or 700,000 CD sales, most people that buy it are white. What do you think the role is, for instance, of white corporations and that in making hip-hop available, but also keeping it largely unconscious?
Well, I think the role of these huge corporations that are marketing and selling and distributing a certain brand of hip-hop is to make money. Like, that is their bottom line. Yeah. I try and focus more on educating people about what these images mean, what they represent, what they embody, why there is such a presence of one sort of masculine image in hip-hop as opposed to another kind of masculine image in hip-hop. Right. For example, I was on my way over to the studio. I was listening to an artist named Stickman from Dead Prez. He has a CD out called Manhood. Okay. And it's a great CD. I love this CD. Okay. Right? Yeah. I mean, he is just like the antithesis of what it is that you hear in like mainstream hip hop all day, every day, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't know who he is, right? Nobody really knows about this CD. It wasn't marketed like in the same way that 50 Cent was marketed, sure, you know, or Jay-Z is marketed, or, you know, Lil Wayne is marketed. But it's a great CD, you know. So you have to ask the question, why is that? Stickman's CD is very positive. He's not really talking negatively about women and black women. Mm-hmm. He's speaking positively about black women. He's talking about, you know, being strong in this capitalistic world and having to sort of be both, you know, have money but also be socially responsible at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great CD, but you just don't hear artists like that all of the time because I just think that people don't believe that this kind of CD will sell. But I think also, I think that, you know, I think people in corporate America, they're not concerned about what's good for black people. Right. What's good for people. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't have a social conscience as much as they should.
Yeah, they don't have, you know, the people who are running these corporations don't necessarily have a major social consciousness, you know?
Do you feel that since you've made the film, do you feel like you're making headway within the African American community, the Latino community, in terms of challenging people to be men, as you say in the film? Do you get a sense, is that a quixotic type of notion, or do you think that it's something that over time you can accomplish?
Well, I'm not alone. I mean, there are other men who are doing very similar work as me. I think that the impact that we're...
Who specifically?
Well, I mean, my colleagues like Kevin Powell, you know, right, Jackson Katz, who is my friend and my mentor, okay, Michael Kimmel, who is an academic who does a lot of work around masculinity, Robert Jensen, you know, who works at the University of Texas, who does a lot of work around masculinity. Okay. Quentin Walcott, you know, who is a good friend of mine and also does a lot of work around domestic violence. Okay. You know, there are other men who are doing this work, and I think that the change that we see, the impact that we see is very slow and is incremental, right? And the work that I have been doing, going around the country, speaking at colleges and universities and high schools and that sort of thing, is that people are touched by the work that I do. People are touched by just my being willing to stand up and to speak out and to speak confidently against things like sexism as a man. You know, I think that does make a difference in the lives of other men, especially if they haven't heard that from a man before.
One thing I was wondering too, you're getting a good response from men. What do black women tell you? What do white women tell you? How you know, proud of their efforts are they with you? Is it the kind of thing where it's music to their ears when they hear a man talking this way?
For the most part, yes, it is.
Not
you know,
always,
but there are always critiques about men like me who do this kind of work, that I don't go far enough, that I'm not, you know, I'm not as critical as I need to be. But those are like critiques that I think help me, you know, that help me sort of work out whatever issues that I'm working on with myself, and also just learning more about the complexity of these issues, you know. So, but by and large, though, you know, most women see me as like a breath of fresh air. You know, they're happy. You know, that there are men out there who are doing this kind of work, who are challenging patriarchy, who are challenging sexism, and that sort of thing. You know.
I'm wondering, do you consider yourself an activist first, or sort of a hybrid filmmaker and activist? I mean, in terms of traveling, is it more that you make films to have a message that is positive and you're an activist first, and that essentially illustrates a lot of the points that you're trying to make, or are you a filmmaker that has such a social message that's part of it?
You know what? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Okay, no, that's fair enough.
I really am, you know, because you know, I'm deeply concerned about social issues. I think about issues around race and class and gender all of the time. My wife will tell you, politics, I mean, I'm just constantly going. My mind is constantly racing. I'm constantly, you know, thinking about and challenging the, you know, whatever issues of the day that there are.
Is your wife, is she kind of the same way? Do you share that?
She's not as much as I am, you know, but she is, you know, socially concerned and socially aware, you know, but I kind of wear it on my sleeve a whole lot more than she does, you know. But I also love making films too. You know, it's easier for me to, I guess, go around the country and to speak on issues than it is to make a film. Like, my film took 6 years to make, and it takes money to make a film, and
Absolutely.
you know that, right?
Oh, sure.
So, so the speaking and the activist work that I do, I think it tides me over until I get my next film off the ground. But the films are basically, you know, it's a way of me using my voice, you know, of using my voice and to speak, you know, to issues that I'm concerned about, that I'm interested in, that I'm passionate about. Okay. But to also, you know, to like have an impact on audiences. Like, I was really heavily influenced by this filmmaker named Marlon Riggs when I was a college student. Okay. And I watched a couple of his films that I really loved. Yeah. And one was called Color Adjustment, the other one was called Ethnic Notions. And I said to myself when I was a student, you know, I want to have that kind of impact. You know, I want to have the same kind of impact on people that Marlon Riggs had on me.
Now, is that part of that idea almost of, I don't know who said it, but that idea of you have to see it to be it? That sort of mentorship, once you see it, it can raise your level of consciousness, and then you can try to self-actualize and be all that you can be.
Exactly, because, you know, Marlon Riggs showed me that, see, I was a journalism major in college, right? So my path was to become a journalist, to present myself as being objective, right?
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
No.
But Marlon Riggs showed me that you could be more than that. Like, you can really get underneath stuff. You can actually get underneath and unpackage issues and have a perspective, you know? Okay. And to challenge things, to challenge popular culture, challenge racism, challenge sexism, challenge class. So for me, I saw that as, I saw him as an example that resonated with me, and it was like he was like a model that I wanted to follow.
Do you see that as part of the fault of sort of the mainstream media, that in a lot of cases it doesn't take a more socially conscious point of view? That, for instance, you don't see the best of African American culture, you don't see the best of all cultures often, because there is often a large profit motive there, and that, you know, these issues are complex, and so you often don't see the kind of diversity and engagement that would allow people to be more exposed to more complex ideas. Do you see that?
What frustrates me is that I feel like mainstream media does not go far enough. They don't dig deep enough. They don't ask the extra 1 or 2 or 3 questions that could reveal you know, or contextualize what's really happening, what really causes, you know, certain problems in our society.
Right.
You know, regardless of whether it deals with race or gender or class or whatever the social issue is. And I feel like, you know, there's a lack of integrity and courage in a lot of what we see in mainstream media, because I think journalists are afraid, you know, to really ask real hardline questions and really, really tough questions and to really dig. Yeah. And I think that's why I like being an independent filmmaker, because I can at least do that for myself. I can ask that extra question, you know, and not really have to be afraid of some corporate sponsorship.
How did you feel that the media handled, for instance, you know, the Don Imus scandal, the Gina Six, you know, scandal, even, for instance, Tavis Smiley not being able to get the major Republican candidates during the, you know, the primary there? How do you feel that the mainstream media covered those, you know, complex events? Did you feel that they put any perspective on those? Did you feel that some of the lessons that we need to learn about race and about consciousness were never even raised?
Well, I just kind of feel like it's just every issue that could be contextualized, right, and can be portrayed as a nuanced, complicated issue is just oversimplified in the media. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think Reverend Wright, you know, Jeremiah Wright has been oversimplified, right? I think the Don Imus case, I think the media was too quick to scapegoat hip hop. You know, I mean, I think it let Don Imus off the hook. You know, when he made the comments about how, you know, he didn't make this stuff up, that, you know, that rap artists say all these things about, you know, black women all of the time. Right. And I think that was, you know, I think that the media was easy, you know, and that it gave Don Imus a pass for the most part. Once he really started to use hip hop, you know, as an excuse for his own attitudes and his behavior.
And he's back working now.
And he's back working right now. Nobody really talks about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, I just think that the media doesn't really dig deep enough, because I don't think that the people who control the media, the industry, do not want to really dig deep. You know, they don't want to scare viewers. They don't want to scare away sponsors.
So you think it's because of the corporate nature?
I think it's fear. I think that, you know, there are a lot of journalists and producers who don't really have the kind of depth when it comes to race issues or gender issues or class issues to really go far enough. And I think it's really problematic, I think.
Do you think this election with the likely nomination of Barack Obama, do you think people have said that it's a chance to have a conversation about race? Do you see that happening? Do you think that, for instance, if he were to become the president, for instance, that could be a moment for America where at least this could be brought into more of a light, that people would say, you know what, we need to talk about these things because they're happening out in front of us?
I think people have to be willing to have that conversation. People have to be open, and people have to be sensitized to the issues of race, right? And the issues, you know, of class, right? And I think that if people are truly open and truly willing to have that conversation, then I think, you know, I think progress can be made by someone like Barack Obama, because I believe that he's a very intelligent man. I think he's a sophisticated man, and I think that he has a really nuanced, sense of what's going on when it comes to race and gender and class, right? But, you know, not everybody is open like that. Not everybody wants to hear, you know, complex conversations about race, you know. Right. I think that people do want, you know, things to be simple, you know. And that's how we kind of live our days. We want our days to be as simple as humanly possible. We don't want complexity, because complexity takes work. You have to think deeply. You have to challenge yourself.
Right.
You have to challenge your ideas.
Exactly, and also America has a complicated past, and there's a lot of people that there is this idea of the American dream, and they want to believe in a certain kind of America. But of course, the real history is so much more complex and often very contradictory.
It's complex, it's contradictory, it's very indicting, you know, on white people, right?
Yeah.
And white patriarchy, you know, because of the history of slavery and miscegenation and all kinds of issues, you know, that have come out of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, you know. And I think that people want black people to forget about that and just kind of like act as if it hasn't happened and it doesn't have any effect today or impact today.
Just sort of acquiesce.
Acquiesce,
Yeah.
to forget, to let it go, and to move forward. And I think that, you know, on a certain level, I think that there's something to be said for moving forward. But I think that there also has to be a real, genuine acknowledgement of what happened in the past, right? And owning up to, you know, the pain and the hurt and the wrongs and how that may have led to some real social inequality and the social disparities that we see today. So if you acknowledge those things, that means that you have to remedy it. Right. And I think that people don't want to take the time nor commit the resources to truly remedying what happened in the past. So,
do you think that if somebody was to kind of provide the sort of leadership that it required to do that, who do you think that might be, and are you optimistic that might happen in coming decades, for instance?
Who do I think that it would be?
Do you think it would be political leaders? Do you think it would be academics? Do you think it would be social leaders, or a combination thereof that would provide the kind of leadership on a national level and also a multiracial level where it would be, you know, basically the leaders of the country? Do you think that that's possible?
I think that leadership is very important, you know. It's very important because you can't really make any real change without the support of people who are in leadership positions, who have power and authority and influence. So I think that from that perspective, I think that there has to be courageous leadership at the top. But I think historically, most social change, you know, dramatic social change or progressive social change really comes from the people, you know, people on the ground,
from the bottom up.
From the bottom up, people who are, you know, who are resisting, you know, various forms of oppression, who speak out, who confront, you know, leadership, who confront people in positions of authority. And I think so. I do think it has to be a combination of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes, you know, social movements happen just at a time where people they're just tired and they can't take it anymore, you know.
Yeah.
And it's usually after the result of years and years and years of neglect and years of possibly corruption or some sort of you know, abuse of the system that has an impact on the everyday person.
What do you think of, like, I know Bill Cosby is controversial for some of his comments about, you know, African Americans to take sort of individual responsibility. Mm-hmm. How do you personally view somebody like him that is challenging African Americans, but who some African Americans have viewed as putting too much responsibility on them? How would you look at that?
I think that Bill Cosby's heart is in the right place, but I think that he's missing an important component that will make me feel more comfortable with his critique. Okay. You know what I'm saying?
What is that?
Well, I think that he absolves white racism and institutionalized racism. You know, I think that personal responsibility and individual sort of responsibility is very important, but I think that that's just part of what needs to happen. You know, it's hard to lift yourself up when you're constantly, you know, being pushed down. You know, when there are social policies that are, you know, sort of legislated that hurt people. You know what I'm saying? That keep people, you know, in their place. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think, you know, that has to be acknowledged. You know, I think that you have to take into consideration institutionalized racism. You know, it's easy to blame poor people. You know?
Right.
I think it's easy to blame the easiest targets, you know, who have always been blamed for their troubles.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, and it's interesting, too, because people that tend to be on the right-hand side of politics tend to sort of look at individual responsibility. Right. People on the left look at societal factors. Yeah. So you're saying that some kind of a solution would really be a combination of both. The society has to reform, and then individuals hopefully can be inspired by that and then try to lift themselves up at the same time.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much
Common
how
sense.
how it has to go. Yeah.
I was curious, with the reaction to the film, you've traveled the world with the film, and I'm wondering, what has the response been like, in the U.S., but also I'm curious outside of the U.S.? How have people looked at this? Have they been surprised at such an expose of hip-hop and a lot of the elements in it, or is this something that they're familiar with, is something that they've thought about, and you're just sort of speaking to that kind of a zeitgeist?
Well, I just got an email on MySpace from someone from Germany, who saw the film, and the film resonated with her because she said the very same issues exist in hip hop in Germany, right?
Okay.
And so she thanked me for making the film, and felt like everybody in Germany needed to see the film, especially people who are into German hip hop. And that kind of struck me as a surprise. I mean, I wasn't expecting the email, so that was good, positive feedback from what's happening across the water.
Yeah.
And I showed the film in Nairobi, Kenya, and the response was really, really great, because they're really grappling with how hip hop is sort of taken over their popular culture.
Okay.
You see hip hop all of the time, on buses, which they call matutus, and you hear it on the radio all of the time, just like you hear it on the radio here in the United States.
And is that American hip-hop?
American hip-hop,
purely?
Ludacris,
Okay.
Lil Wayne,
Okay.
Jay-Z, all of the artists that we listen to today. I mean,
Yeah.
my wife and I took a cab, and we were listening to the radio in this cab, and it was almost like listening to Hot 97, in New York City.
Sure.
I mean, it was, you would never think that we were in Nairobi, Africa, if you just limited everything to what was taking place inside the car.
Now, is that disappointing for you to not get sort of a different flavor on a radio station when you would be, for instance, in Nairobi, or is that something that you'd expect it to be sort of generic like that?
I think we were a little surprised,
Yeah.
and we've been told that their own cultural art forms are being suppressed because of American popular culture.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the artists that want to create art that's more native to their culture are not really being heard,
Yeah.
right? Because hip hop is like so dominant. So it was surprising. But the other thing too was which was interesting to me was that they have very little knowledge of some of the more politically conscious rap artists over there.
Okay.
So like they're very familiar with 50 Cent, they're very familiar with, like I said, Lil Wayne and other rappers of the day, but
Sure.
they don't really know who Talib Kweli is.
Okay.
They don't really, some do, but not everybody. So it's like they're missing like a big piece of what hip hop can be.
And did you get a sense over in Africa that there's something about the more conscious hip-hop that because they're not hearing that it's not, giving them some of the encouragement and the message to lift themselves up, because there are specific African problems in every country.
Right.
And if they saw, again, some of the best of the more conscious hip-hop, that could be more inspiring for them.
Well, I think that they are being inspired by American hip-hop artists, because I think that they identify with the struggle of coming from poverty and then now having something.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that it basically, it's a fantasy world for them, right? They see and understand that they're poor. They see these rap artists who they know and believe come from a similar circumstance.
Okay.
And they see them rising out of that circumstance. And so I think that they are inspired by it, right? I wouldn't say they're not inspired. Okay. But it may not, I think that what they're inspired to do and become may not be the best thing for them to aspire to be and become. Okay. They're not aspiring to change the political system, right, through American hip hop. They're aspiring to own a Hummer. You know what I'm saying?
Advance themselves.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Or to have, a lot of jewelry and have a lot of clothes and have a lot of women.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is very different than challenging, the very social structures that are keeping you down or keeping you oppressed or keeping you poor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the two different visions of hip hop, right? Mm-hmm. And the one that's much more materialistic, that's much more hyper aggressive and sexualized and all that kind of stuff, is given much more weight,
Sure.
than the other kind.
Yeah, it's marketed so much more.
Exactly.
I'm curious, it's interesting, I believe you have a new short film that you're working on about Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can tell me a bit about that. I was curious about that.
I'm working on a film called Barack and Curtis, and it's going to be a short, sort of interesting look at the comparison and contrast between Barack Obama masculinity and 50 Cent masculinity. 50 Cent sort of embodying this really over-the-top, exaggerated sense of masculinity in hip-hop, right. And Barack Obama representing a very different vision of masculinity, you know, in politics. And how do the two compare? Are there similarities? Is there overlap? And what is it that these two individual men are seeking? You know? Okay. You know, and at the end of the day, they're both seeking the same thing: power, right? Influence, money, respect, right? But they're going about it in two very different ways.
Are they almost alter egos of each other in a way?
They may be. That's what the film is going to explore. Okay. So I mean, I really don't have an outcome, you know, with this at this point. And it's only going to be a short film, so there's only so much that I'll be able to get into. But I think it's really an interesting look, you know, and also, is there a paradigm shift taking place within the minds of young African-American males in terms of, you know, what they see is viable, like a viable career choice for them? You know, the world of politics, right? Versus the world of entertainment, you know? So that's kind of like what the film is about.
I guess my last question for you would be, what would you like people that have seen your film, have seen this interview, of all races, genders, backgrounds, anywhere, what would you like them to take away from this project? Yeah. Are you challenging all of us with something specific to be men, to be women, to be the best that we can be, to be examples for other people? Yeah. What are you challenging us to do?
Well, you know, I want people, after they watch my film, to listen to hip-hop with a different ear, right? And to watch hip-hop music videos with a different lens, right? To think critically about the images that we consume, that we endorse, that we co-sign, but then to also look at popular culture in general and the images, all of the images and representations of men and women, maleness and femaleness that we see on a daily basis, that perpetuate sexism. And that's difficult, you know, because it's all around us. But I think that when you begin to open your mind up to it and you start to see them for what they are, you know, you'll see that, you know, sexism is very pervasive, and violence is very pervasive, homophobia is very pervasive in our culture, and we have to be willing to confront it and combat it before it can ever change.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
All right, and thanks for being with us. We'll see you again soon.